Hello friends, I'm Mazafta from Easy Approach, and in this video I'm gonna teach how to make API calls and how to parse data effectively and efficiently. As I've received many requests regarding this topic, and students normally face issues while making HTTP or API calls and parsing it. So I decided to make this video. API is actually an in-between guide that connects our application to the backend where data is stored. With using correct API, you can get some data, you can add some data, or you can even update the data on backend. In this tutorial, we are going to use some dummy APIs that we can get from this website, that is requestresponse.in. So it's actually short of request and response. And over here, just a little below, you can find multiple endpoints that you can use in order to get some data from their server or to get a list of data or to create a data or to update or delete. So you can definitely perform CRUD operations over the data that you can get from the server. And for making HTTP requests on Flutter, we have many different options. So we can use HTTP package, or we can even use div package. So in this video, I'm more interested in using div package. You can find the div package on pub.dev, and for installing it, you can go on installation tab and you can just copy this line and you have to paste it inside your pubspec.yaml file. So you can paste it after Cupertino icons and you can click on this pub-get. So this would install this div package, and then we can use it for making HTTP calls. And once you add the div and you get the response once you make the HTTP request, you have to convert it into the real Dart objects, and that's what we call parsing of the data. Because we get the data in raw format, in either JSON format or XML format. So we have to convert it into real Dart objects so that we can use it in our application. We can either show it on the list or we can do anything we want. So for parsing the data, we have a couple of options we can use. We can either use the Dart convert library that helps you converting the JSON object into Dart real objects so that we can use it in our application. But doing that, you have to do a lot of work manually. What we can rather do, we can use this Json Serializable. This actually generate a class for JSON code that helps you convert the JSON data into real object. And it actually helps you avoiding the boilerplate code. So we are definitely going to use this in our application. So for installing this, you have to go in installing tab like you did with the div package, and you just have to paste this line in your pubspec.yaml file. So you can do it after div, and then you are good to click on this pub-get. This would install the package in your application, and you can use it in your application. And now what we have installed a couple of packages successfully. The first one is div that will help us making HTTP requests. And the second one is Json Serializable that will be helpful for us for parsing the data into real Dart objects. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create a new file, new class file that will be actually for configuring the div package and for making HTTP requests. So inside the lib, you can create a new Dart file with, you can name it either div service, you can name it or HTTP service. This would make more sense. So inside it, we will do all the stuff for configuring the div package and also for making HTTP calls using div. So just make this file, and it's asking for, okay, so we can cancel it because we don't want to add it to Git right now. Okay, so we can just make it an ordinary class. And inside it, what we can do, because we'll make the HTTP request using div package, so we need to get the div object first. You can make it private. And inside the constructor of HTTP service, we can initialize this div instance. So for initializing, we can just write div. And inside it, you have to give some base options. So the base options, using base options, you can actually give some global stuff like like base URL. So this base URL will be used throughout the app. Whenever you'll make the HTTP call, you need to have the base URL. So in our case, the base URL is this request response.in. So we can just copy this. This is our base URL, and at the top of the file, you can even do inside the HTTP service. And you can make it base URL. I think you can just make it final base URL. And inside it, you can just paste this. So we can give this base URL over here. And if you have like a header in which you can give some authorization tokens or something, so you can give it in a map form also. But I don't think the API that we are using requires the header or authentication, any sort of authentication. Anyways, so we have configured, or we have actually initialized the DAO instance that we will use actually for making HTTP requests. And now we will add some interceptors to this DAO instance. By interceptors, what is actually interceptors? So by interceptors, you can have callbacks, and those callbacks would get called in different stages of API calling. So you can keep track of what is happening, because in some cases, or most of the cases, you have to keep track of what you are sending to the server and what you are receiving. Sometimes we make mistake while sending the data to the server, and we get some unusual response. So for solving that problem, we have to debug the code, and we have to spend a lot of time. But once we add the interceptors, we can see the progress in console. Well, like we can print what is the data we are sending and what's the response we are getting. We can print it on console, and then we don't have to worry about what is happening behind the scene. So let's see how we can add the interceptors to the DAO package. And those callbacks would get called in every API calls that we will make using DAO package. So for adding the interceptors, first I'm making a function which is initialize interceptors. And inside it, okay, so we have to correct this, initialize interceptors. And inside it, we can use this DAO instance, and inside the DAO, we have interceptors, and inside it, we have add. And what we can do, we have an object which is interceptors wrapper. So I think I've made some typo. It's actually interceptors wrapper. So here it is. And inside it, we have callbacks, different callbacks that we can use in order to keep track of what's happening while we making the HTTP request. So first one is the on error. The second one is on request. So this on request will get called whenever we'll make some requests, and on response will obviously get called whenever we get some response. So whenever there will be a successful API request, so we will get some response, and the response will receive inside this. So here we got some response, and this on request, as I said, will get called once we make the HTTP request. So here it is request. You can give it any name, but the object that you will receive over here will be request object. And at last we have this on error. So over here we'll receive the error. So this callback will actually get called if we get some error while making the HTTP request. So inside the on error, what we can do, we can just print the error message. So you can see the type of this error is DAO error. So inside it we have couple of things, like we have the request options and a lot of other stuff, but we are more interested in message so that we can see what error we are getting and we can fix it. And inside the on request, let's first see what it is. It is actually request options. So inside it, we have base URL and we have the path and we have, okay. So what we can do, we can, inside it, we can print the request type, like get, post, or update. So you can print the request type using request dot, I think it's type. No, it's something else. I think it's method. Okay. So this is how you can print the request method, and after it, we can print the URL or the endpoint on which we are hitting. So this way you can know what method you are using and what endpoint you are using for a certain request, so that you can know it's actually right endpoint and right method. So inside it we have endpoint actually. No. So it's actually path. Okay. So inside the on response, let's first see what we have inside the response. So it's actually response. So we can just print the data in the on response so that we can know what data we are actually getting from the server for a certain request. Now we have to initialize, we have to call this initialize interceptors inside the constructor after we configured the dev package. So this is how we can add the interceptors. And now what we have to do, we have to make a method, or actually a feature for making get request, because we'll first make the get request. That is why first I'm creating the feature for get request. So the feature will return a response object that's actually from the dev package. You can see dev.dart file. So just give it a name like get request. And obviously, if you are making the get request, you need to have the endpoint. So over here, we will receive the endpoint. And as this is a feature, and we'll make some asynchronous API request, so we need to add the async. Now for making the get request, we can use the dev instance. So what we have to do, we have to write dev, and inside it we have get. And here you can provide the endpoint. And this will return us the response type object. So first, let me create a response object, which is from dev. And we can initialize it with this dev.get. So you can see it's giving some error because, okay, so there's slightly difference in the spelling. And you can see we cannot assign this future response and to the response type. So what we have to do, this get is actually a future, and it returns a response type object. So we have to use a wait to get the response object, because it's actually a future. And what we can do further, we can wrap this thing in try and catch. And this type of error, we get the exception one while we make the HTTP request using dev package. The exception we get is actually the dev error. So we can specify here the type, and just for the sake of debugging and making sure that we are not getting error, and to know what sort of error we are getting actually, so we can just print the error on console. Okay, so I think it's should be error. Okay, we can just print the message. And also we can throw the exception with the error message, so that the caller method will get the acknowledgement and he can catch the error. So you can throw exception, and inside it you can just pass e.message. And if there is no error, you can simply return the response object. So that's great. And now we have the get request method that will be useful for getting the data from the server. Now let's create the model for the data that we are going to get actually. So we are going to actually get this single user first. So you can see this is its structure. So we have to make the model of this structure according to by using the JSON Serializable. And for using JSON Serializable, we have already installed the package. So what we have to do, we have to go back to the project, and inside the lib, we can create a model folder, and inside it, we can create a file for the user. So it's actually the user model. You can just keep it user. Now let me open the model. So this whole is actually the response of this endpoint for getting the single user. So you can see this is the whole JSON object, and inside it we have a couple of more JSON objects. The first one is the data. So data is the key actually for this JSON object, and this is actually the complete JSON object just for the user. And the other key is support, and the JSON object associated to it is this. So it's actually the support and some promotional stuff for this response, or for this app, for this whole website. So we are not really interested in this support thing, but we are rather interested in this data part. So it's actually a part of this complete JSON object. So first we have to make the JSON model, or sorry, the model class for this particular JSON object, which is for data, which is actually the user in this case. So we have to make the JSON, we have to make the Dart object or model class for just for this JSON object first. So for making this, what we have to do, we first need to create a class, and you can name it anything, like I'm using user. And inside it, we have to use JSON value. So we first have to import the JSON annotation. I think I haven't. Let me first recheck if this JSON Serializable is installed. Just for the sake of confirmation, I'm reinstalling it. Now let's go back to user.dart, and we should be able to import annotation file. Okay, here it is. So this is JSON annotation, and then what we have to do, we have to use the JSON value. So I think JSON, the J is capital, and then we have value, and inside it we have name. And here we have to specify the key for each of the fields in the user object. So here is the user JSON object, and you can see inside it we have many different fields. The first one is ID, the email, first name, last name, and avatar. So for each of this value, there is a key associated. So we have to register these keys in the user model. So this JSON value is actually indicates that we are going to get some field with the name ID, and we have to store it, because this is an integer value. We have to store it in integer ID. And okay, so there is some issue. Maybe I did some mistake. So let's see this, what it is. Okay, so we don't need to have the name, we just need to write here ID, something like this. This is the positional argument, not the named argument. So make sure this ID should match this ID, even though you can change the name of the variable, because it's just a way you will call this ID, but this ID should be same with the response that you are getting from the server. If you don't make it same, then you will not get the ID in this ID variable. And then similarly, we have to do the same thing for each of the fields that we have in the response. So let me see what is left. Then we have email. We can rather copy this whole thing and paste it on the project file so that we don't have to navigate back to the website. So the other one is the email, so we can just copy this thing. As I said, this should be same. The key should be same with the should matches the original response. And then we can, because this is actually a string value for the email, so we can make a string variable and then we can store it with any name. So I'm just making the same name, but you don't have to give the same name. Actually, it's not necessary. And let's duplicate this thing again, and then we have the first name, which is actually the string again. So, and this is first name, and you can see now we have different key and the different variable name, so you can do it. And then similarly, we have another field which is for the last name, so we can just change the key and also the name, last name. And then we have the avatar, which is actually again a string value for a dummy picture or something. So we can just get this avatar property, and then we can give it a name of avatar. And now we can remove this access code. Let's format it. That's good. I just realized that we made a mistake. This is not the JSON value. This is actually a JSON key, because we are not actually, this is actually a key. We are registering the key. So now we have the property name inside it. Okay. So let's rename all these so I can find in this whole file, and then we can just rename it. And also we can give here the name. So this is a cool feature of Android Studio. Now our model is complete, but there are still some things that are missing and that are actually important for JSON Serializable to work on the model. So the first thing is we need to have the constructor for this user model. Even if you don't want to have constructor, still you have to create it. You can make it empty constructor. So making empty constructor is simple. Just you have to write user, and then you have to write the round brackets and then semicolon. And there are a couple of lines that you have to paste or that you have to write in this user model, and that's actually the boilerplate code that you can get from the JSON Serializable documentation. So you can open the README tab, and then you can find the person model, and at the last, the couple of lines, you have to paste these lines in your code. And then this is actually for the person. They have given the example for a person model. So what we can do, we can rather have user. So just replace all the persons to the user. That's great. So it will definitely give us error because this user from JSON and this user to JSON is actually will be actually generated code that that JSON Serializable will generate after we run some command. So initially it will give error. There's no problem. We will solve it. Now for generating the file that will contain this user from JSON and user to JSON, we need to do few things before the JSON before it gets generated. So the first thing is we have to include the user.g.dart file. So this file is not currently present. This will be generated by a build runner, and this will be generated by JSON Serializable actually. So make sure you give the same name as the class name is. Just you need to add g.dart. So if it is x, then it will be x.g.dart. So this is what you have to do. And now you have to install another package in your pub spec. So this is actually build runner. So inside the installation, you can copy this thing. And this time, because it is actually dev dependency, so you have to add it after. Sorry. Okay, I think I have to recopy it. You have to paste it after the Flutter test. So just remove this. We just need to have, okay, that's great. So you have to install this package. So for installing, you can click on pub-get. Actually, there's a difference in dev dependencies and in dependencies. So the dev dependencies will only run at compile time. So this build runner will actually help us to generate the code for the model class that will contain some method that is not currently present in the file. So this will only work, the generation of the code only works at compile time, at the development time. So these are called dev development dependencies. They don't have to work on the production. So that's why we have to add it inside the dev dependencies. All the packages or all the dependencies that works while the app runs in production, those dependencies will go in this dependency section. Now, after installing this, you can see inside the model, it is still giving error because the file is not yet generated. So now for generating the file, we have to write some commands. So this is actually flutter pub run, and then you have to write the build underscore runner, and after it you have to write build. So you have to press enter, and this will do some processing. It will definitely take some time, and it will generate this user.g.dart file that will contain these two methods, and then there should be no error. So the build runner runs successfully, and astonishing that it didn't generate the file. Let me see what happened. Okay, so there's one thing that we have missed. Before starting the class, we have to write JSON Serializable. So this is what you have to add. Now let's run the build runner again. And this should now generate the file. You can see succeeded after 1.3 seconds with 2 outputs. And you can see there is no more error again. So, and here's the file, the generated file. And it does contains the user from JSON and user to JSON that will be responsible for parsing data from JSON to object, dart object, or from dart object to JSON. Now, as we have the model class for the user object, we have to make the model class for the whole response for the single user. So you can see for the single user, this is actually the response. It contains the user JSON, and it also contains the support JSON. We are not interested in the support JSON, but the whole JSON object contains another nested object that is user object. So we have to make the JSON object for the whole response. So for making it, we have to create another file, and let's name it single user response. So I think I have made some typo, but doesn't matter, we can continue with it. Now we have to create the same, we have to write the same code that we wrote before, like we did for the user model. And this time we don't need to forget the JSON serializable. And for this, we first have to import, okay, we first have to import the JSON annotation. And then we'll be able to use this JSON serializable. And as I said already, there's only one key in this response, that is data. We are ignoring this because we don't need it. So there's one key that is data, and the type of the value that it associated with this key is the user. So let's see how we can actually register this key. So first of all, let's make a constructor which is empty, and then we have JSON key, and the name of the JSON key is actually data, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, it's data, and it should be same. But the type of this data is actually user that we have generated, and you can name it anything. So I'm giving it JSON, sorry, user. It's giving some error. What's saying? Too many positional arguments, but 0 found. Okay, if I go inside it, there's a property called name, and I think there should be colon instead of equals to. Okay, so there's only one property, that is user, and we have registered it. Now we have to paste the boilerplate 2 lines that we paste in the user model. So let's go in the user model and let's copy these lines and just paste it, and make sure you replace this user to the JSON, to the single user response. And they are, okay, we have to update this user, the single user, also this. And again, we need to add, in this case, again, single user. Make sure the file name is same, user, and I made a typo in response, so it is response. So make sure you give the same name, and then .g . So this is it. Again, I'm telling you, we are ignoring the support property. If you want to add it, then you first have to make the model for this support object, and then we can register, we can register the support using the same code like we did for the user. Just you need to replace the key name, and then you need to replace the object type from user to support. Now, as we have set up everything, we just need to generate this .g . file. So again, we need to do the same thing. We need to run Flutter pub run and the stuff that we did before in case of user. It will again generate the file for you. You can see it's generated 2 outputs, and you can see there's no more error. And if I reopen this model, you can find the single underscore user dot underscore response dot g dot file. It's pretty long. So this is what you have to do for a single API hitting, because it actually include this whole response, and we have made the Dart object for this response, and then inside it we have a nested object that is of user, and we have also made the user object for this JSON object as well. Now we are good to make our first HTTP request. In this video, first of all, what I'm doing, I'm removing this my home page widget. That it's actually the default widget. I haven't changed it yet. So let's remove the stuff, the default stuff, and I'm making a stateful widget in another class. Like let's create a package for screen, and let's inside this let's create a single let's name it single user screen. So this will be actually a stateful widget, and for state management, I'm not doing anything fancy like using provider or something. I'm just going with the classical set state thing for managing a state. So let's name it single user screen. So the purpose of this screen will be like fetching the user from the server using the div package, making HTTP calls. So let's import the material.dart file, and let's make a basic structure of it. Like let's have a scaffold, and inside it we have an app bar, and let's give a title, something like get single user, and then we have body, and initially I'm just having a circular progress indicator. in the center. Let's wrap this thing in center. And okay, so we have to give the reference of this single user screen in the home. And let's run the application again. So this should definitely show us a screen having a circular progress indicator in the center and an app bar having a title get single user. Now inside this screen, I'm gonna make a feature. Basically inside the state class, I'm gonna make a feature that will be responsible for getting user. Get user from okay, we can just say get user. And as we have to perform the asynchronous processes inside this get user, so we have to have async keyword of the name of the feature. Now before calling the API, we need to have the reference of this HTTP service class. So okay, so we can firstly we have to make the object of this HTTP service. Let's name it HTTP. Okay, now we have to get the reference. Okay, we have to actually call the get method that's inside get feature, actually that's inside this HTTP service. So we can call it http dot get request, and this is actually a feature that will return us the response object. So for the endpoint, we will see what's the endpoint, and we have to store it in the response object. And since it's a feature, we have to use here await. Okay, that's it. So I think we have to import this response. That's great. Now let's see what's actually the endpoint for a single user. So it's actually single user endpoint. So we have /API/users and then the user ID. So I'm just using a static user ID because it's a dummy API. And what we can do, let's split the variable declaration so that we can wrap this line inside the try and catch. Because as you know, we have thrown the exception in the get request in case we get some exception. You can see this line. So this will definitely, we need to wrap this get request in the try and catch so that we can get the exception. So in case we get exception, we can just print it on the screen. Okay, it's just the exception. There's no, because we have returned a string form, so we just need to print the string exactly, not the message. And another thing that we have to do, once we get the response, we have to check if the response is okay. So how we can check it? You can compare the status code with 200. And if that's the case, it means there's nothing wrong with your API calling. And in case if we get some other status code, then we can print there is some problem. Status code not 200, something like this. And in case we get the correct output, we get the response, what we can do, we can create another object that is for user. No, actually what we can do, we have the whole object for get user, single user response actually. So it's actually the object for the whole response. And then inside it, we have the user object, we can get it inside it. So how you can convert the response data into this single user object? So for doing this, first let's say single user response equals to, and now we have to give the value. So as you know, we have made the single user response object, and inside it we have single user from JSON. So what we can do inside the single user, we have the from JSON, and inside it we can pass the response dot data, which is in the map form. And then we would have the single user response object. And what we can do, we can wrap this thing, as we don't have the provider or some other state management. We have to do the classical way to acknowledge the Flutter framework that we have some changes in the state of the single user screen state, and the UI needs to be re-rendered. So we need to do the update things inside the set state. And okay, let's make another variable for user. And then what we can do, after we get the response, we can also initialize the user. So we can get the user object from the response, and inside it we have user. So that's great. So now we have the get user object, the future actually, that will get the user from the server. And what I'm gonna do, I want to make the UX more good, more user friendly. So we need to show the loading stuff while the API calling is actually being in process. So what we can do, let's make a bool variable is loading, and initially before the API calling, it should be false because it's not actually calling the API. But before we call the get request, we need to make it true. And once we complete the API calling, we need to make it false. And in case we get some exception, again, in this case, we also need to do it false. And now what we can do, we can simply first check if is loading is true. So if it is true, then in this case, we need to show the loader. However, if it is not true, we need to show some content that will show the detail of the user. So let's make the column widget, because we have to show some. Let's reformat it. And let's wrap this column widget into a container. This is just a UI stuff. You can make anything. The purpose is just to show the data, just to get the data and show it or utilize it in any way you want. So I'm giving it a width double dot infinity. And inside the column widget, I'm gonna give the main axis alignment center so that all the content should be in vertical center. And then in the children, let's first have a text, or first have a network image. So image.network, because you know we get the string image, it will be some dummy image that we get in the user, and inside we have avatar. Let's use this, and then let's make a little space, a vertical space, before the next item comes. So let's give a container height of 16 pixels, and let's make a text widget, and inside it just write hello, and after it let's give the username, and also we can have the user last name as well. I think this is enough to show the user detail and just to give you the idea that the API calling is working or not. Now, as we have built the UI and we have the future, now we need to call this future when this screen is initialized. So what we can do inside the init state, we can we can write, we can simply say get user. So this will call this future, and once we have the user object, then it will show this UI. We can do another thing. We can check if the user, because it's not always the case that if we have is loading false, it means we have the user. It may be possible that we have finished the is loading, but still we don't get the user because of any reason. So in this case, we need to check if user is not null, then show this UI, else we can show in center child. In the center, we can say no user object, something like this. And this is it now. Okay, now let's run the application, and let's open the console also so that we can see if we get some error, and we can see the progress, because we have added the interceptors in the Deo package. So whenever we'll make some API call, it will show us the progress in the console. So let's restart the application, and it should actually get the user once this app is successfully built. And you can see we get some error. Get request was called on null. Okay, because we haven't made the object, I think. Okay, yeah, we have to initialize this also. So let's initialize it before the get user. HTTP equals to HTTP service. I think we don't have the default constructor. No, we have. Okay. Okay, now we are good to rerun the application. Okay, so let's run the application again. Make sure you open the console so that we can see the progress. And the app is restarted. This should... Okay, so you can see it's calling the API, and wow, strange that it works on the second time. Okay, so you can see that here it's showing that we are making the get request, and the URL, the endpoint is this, and against this request we are also getting the data. And you can see we have rendered the UI accordingly. You can see the image, and you can see the name of the user that we have gotten. Now let's create another view, and this time we have actually fetch single user from the server. Now let's fetch the user list from the server, and for this we have another endpoint. You can see this is the list user endpoint, and this is the actually endpoint that we are going to use. It also include the pagination thing, but we are not actually going to handle the pagination stuff. We'll just simply put a static page like 1 or 2 or anything, and then we will make the response model according to this JSON object, and then we'll definitely going to show it on the screen. So let's go back to the project, and let's create another screen, because as I said, for each of the API call, I will make a different screen so that it will be easy for us to manage, and for you to, when you get the code from the GitHub, you can easily identify what's happening with the which code. So this will be list user screen. And it would have almost the same thing, just list user screen, and it will be a stateful widget. Let's import the material.dart stuff, and then let's have a scaffold. And if I can copy the code from this single screen, so this is the app bar, that we need to copy, and then we have the is loading thing. Also, we need to have the HTTP object, because we need to call the API, and for this we need to have the HTTP. Let's import this file, and inside the init state, let's initialize the HTTP service object. There we go. And then we need to have the future for get list user. So what we can do, we can copy the same future, because we need to change some things, and we'll do it. But first, let's have this future, and then instead of single user, get list user, something like this. Then we need to import the response is loading. We just need to change the endpoint. Let's change the endpoint. And for the list user, it's the endpoint. And as I said, you can, it actually accept the dynamic page. It actually includes the pagination, but we are not going to handle the pagination. We just need to get the data from the server in form of list, and then we need to show it on the screen. So let's paste this, and let's give it page 2 or 1, whatever you want. And inside the set state, where we actually get the response, we'll not get the single user response. Instead, we will get the multiple user response or list user response. And for that, we need to first create the model class. So let's open the project explorer, and let's create another model. And this time it will be not single user response, but it will be list user response. Okay, so I mistakenly pressed enter. So let's again create a new dot file, and this time let's name, oh my god, I again pressed enter. Let's delete this, and let's again create a new file. List user response. And then first of all, we need to import JSON Annotation, and let's add the Json Serializable. And let's create a class list user response. And now let's see what sort of data, what sort of fields we are having in this response. So let's go back to the screen. Okay, so firstly, we have these 4 properties. That's actually for pagination, but still I'm going to have these in my model, so that you can have idea how we can handle this all things. So let's paste this, and let's cut this page. Make sure you have the same key names actually for the data. So this is actually the page number, so you can make, this is integer, you can give any name. Similarly, we have to do for the per page, so it's actually indicates how many items coming per page with a single page actually. So you can give it per page, and then we have total number of records. So it's actually total, and so these are the values. 2 will be stored in this page when it will parse, it will get the data from the server, and this will be stored in this per page, and this 12 will be stored in this total, because we have matched this key with this variable. So this is how it works. And at the last, we have total pages. So this should be total pages. You can give any name, just you need to make sure that the key should be same as your response, as in your response. So now let's remove this whole thing. Now there's the most important thing in this response is the list of user. And you can see here, it's the key of this list of users. You can see this is the user object. Here it is, another one. It's actually the list of user. And it's wrapped in the square bracket. It indicates that it's a list of user. And the key for this whole list of user is data. So let's see how we can manage it. We have to do the same thing. For each of the field, we need to have a JSON key. And as you can see, it's data. But the data type should be list of user. And let's name it users. So this is how it is. It's pretty simple, you know. And now we need to have the same code to paste the boilerplate stuff. Just you need to change the single user response into list user response. And then at the last, we need to have, we need to include the list underscore user underscore response dot g dot file, even though it's not present, but it will be generated by the JSON. Okay, it's actually generated by the JSON Serializable or the build runner. So let's run the command. And let's wait for it to finish and to generate the file for us. Okay, so it's giving some error. If we go back, and you can see it's saying that this list user response has no default constructor. And as I said, we must have the default constructor in the JSON serializable object. Now let's run this command again. This should now create the generated file successfully. Okay, now you can see that it generates 2 files and there's no more error. And let's go back to the list user screen. So now when we get the response, we have to parse it into list user response. So let's first create the object for the list user response. Let's give it a name, list user response. Also, we need to have the list of users that will get inside the list user response. So let's name it users. And we need to do the same thing exactly like we did in the previous screen. So we first need to have list user response equals to list user response, and inside it we have from JSON, and here we can just pass the response dot data, which is in the JSON map form. And after this, we can initialize the users, which is the list of user that we can get from the list user response. You can see inside it we have the list of users. Here it is. And then we can render the UI accordingly. So first of all, we can copy the code from the previous screen because the logic is same. If is loading is true, then in this case we need to show the progress indicator. Instead of user, we have users now. And then we need to build the UI accordingly. So just we are going to have the list of view.builder, because as you know, we will get the list of users. So we need to have a list in which we can show the users that we got from the response. So the item builder is first let's first define the item count, and the item count should be users.length. Okay, and then the item count, sorry, the item builder should be first we have to pass the context, and then we have index, and then inside it we can just use the list style. That is the default way of making items inside the list. And then in the title we can we can just give the user. First, let's get the current user by calling users index, and let's make it a variable so that we don't have to re-reference it every time. And you can just, inside the title, you can just print the first name, and in the leading you can use image.network, and you can utilize the string image from the user object. And in the subtitle, print anything. Let's see what we have inside the user that can be printed. So we have the email address. Let's print the email address. And make sure we have to use semicolon at the last. No? Okay, just basically we have actually we have used here a condition. If user is not null, then show this UI, and then we have to define the else case. So in this case, we can just we can go back, and as we define here, you can just copy this line and you can paste it. Okay, let's reformat it. And inside the init state, we can call this method, which is actually a future, get list users, and make sure you change this single user screen to list user screen. Okay, let's open the console and let's run the application again. So this should first show us a loading. Okay, so you can see it's showing the loading, and it's actually called the API, and we get the response, and this should reflect us on the screen. Wow, so you can see it's actually giving us the expected result on the screen. So this is how you can make the HTTP requests using Deo package, and you can see the progress before you see the result on the screen. You can see on console, and that's really a great thing to have, because sometimes we send the wrong data in the endpoint parameter, in the endpoint query parameter, and then we get the wrong response. And if you cannot see what you are sending actually, then it will be really hard for you to debug, and it will take your time really just to let you know that what's going wrong with the API calling. But using Deo package, you can easily add the interceptors, and you can get the response on console. You can get the progress. And we have also used the Json Serializable. That's really great package. You don't need to write tons of code just to convert the JSON into Rail.object or to Rail.object to JSON. So you just need to add the Json Serializable, and you just have to write some few lines, and this will do the work for you. So this is it from the video. This may look a small thing, but in every application, you have to perform, you have to do the network interaction, you have to call the API, you have to get the response, and you have to parse it according to the business logic. And this is how you show the data on the screen. So this is really something that can give you the ability to make a big application and to make a practical application. So this is it from this video. If you like the video, please give a big thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed the channel, please subscribe the channel and share the videos with those who want to learn Flutter with easy approach. So thank you for watching.